So now we're ready to talk about part 3 of this responder implementation. And this is the part that's going to be the ChatGPT part. So we're going to talk about the ChatGPT sentiment controller and sentiment service, which uses the OpenAPI service to interact with ChatGPT. And as usual, you can find it in the EX3 project, in my RSocket folder, in my live lessons GitHub repository. And here we are. This is the ChatGPT sentiment portion. And you can see we have the sentiment controller and the sentiment service. So let's look at the controller first. It's pretty short, actually. It's a controller that's auto-wired to the sentiment service. It's got an endpoint that takes a quote or a mono to a quote, forwards to the service, and then the service does the rest of the work. So let's take a look at the service. So the service has got this dependency injection auto-wired field called OpenAiService, which is created by this bean over here. And here's what it looks like. So this is the factor method bean that makes an OpenAiService instance, and you can see it makes a new instance, and it passes in the API key. And the API key, again, is automatically generated. It's not included in the repository, and expects to be in a private properties file. So you have to make a private properties file in the root of your folder. And there's a really fun little build script here that is a Gradle config script that makes the build config API key from the private properties field. And this is a very common thing because you don't want to put your private API keys into the source code because it'll cause all kinds of problems. Here's the analyze sentiment method. As you can see, we take the quote, mono quote, make ourselves a prompt, make a request, and then update the quote. So let's take a look at each of these things in turn. Here's the first one. So make prompt makes us a new chat message. And chat message is one of the key data structures in the OpenAI service. And you can see that we're going to basically make a chat message saying what role it's going to be. What's going to be the system role. There's like system, user. I think there's assistant also. That's not too important for what we're doing. And then we're going to generate the prompt given the quote. So let's go see what the prompt looks like. This is the code that I wrote, of course. This is my prompt. I'm always very polite when I talk to ChatGPT. I don't know whether it makes a difference, but it makes me feel better. That way, when the robots take over the world, they'll remember that I was nice to them. So don't be mean to your LLM. Please analyze the sentiment of this quote. So we get the quote from the play. We get the play. So that gives ChatGPT some context. It could probably figure it out just from the quote alone, but I gave it both things. And I say, I want the result in one paragraph with no more than 3 sentences. So that'll give a limit on how wordy it gets. There's other things you can also do to control that as well. All right, so we've now got a prompt. Now we're going to go ahead and make a request message to send to ChatGPT. And here's how this works. There's a builder called a chat completion request that comes from the OpenAI service library. So we make ourselves a chat completion request builder. We specify what model we want it to use. This is one of the common models for chat completions, GPT 3.5 Turbo. We then take that message that we created, which includes the prompt, and we attach that in our Fluent little pipeline. And then we set the temperature. So temperature is one of those things that controls how deterministic or non-deterministic we want ChatGPT to be. A larger number, I think it goes up to 2 or so. A larger number means be more non-deterministic in your response. And the reason for doing that is sometimes you want ChatGPT to speculate or to try pulling things out of thin air that may be more creative because you maybe want to make it look like it's a person you're talking to, not an AI tool. But I gave it a low temperature setting because I wanted to just get the essence of what the quote analysis was. But you could fiddle around with that and see if there were differences. I only want a single response. You can also give a number of responses, and it'll give you back a bunch of them. I just wanted one. I build the chat completion request. So now I've got myself a chat completion request, and I take that chat GPT request. Oh, and by the way, I should also have said, let's see. Oh, sorry. So now we're going to go ahead. Now that we got the request, we're going to go ahead and get the quote sentiment. So we pass in the quote and the request. And here's where we actually send the request to ChatGPT. We go ahead and say, create chat completion. You give it the request. That's going to go over and make the call, the RESTful API call, to the ChatGPT service. So that's what's doing the actual request call. And what comes back will then be this thing called a chat completion result. And it actually can contain a bunch of things. We only want the first one because we only asked for one. So we get the first result, the one and only result here. And we want to get the message corresponding to that result. And we want to get the content of that message. There's actually a bunch of other stuff that comes back. We don't care about that. We just want to know, what was your sentiment analysis, ChatGPT, please? So that's where we're going to get that back. And we take the result and we set the sentiment portion of the quote. And that is then updated. It's just a string. Oh, I should have showed you that earlier. So here's the quote. This is the quote entity. And you can see the quote entity is got an integer, which is its primary key. It's got the play, Hamlet, Macbeth, and so on. It's got the quote, and then it's got the sentiment analysis. So whatever ChatGPT comes back with is what's going to be put there. So that gets returned. We set the sentiment. Now we return the updated quote back to the requester, and we can display the results. So that's kind of showing you how you can program ChatGPT. And I really like this library, this Chat AI service library. It makes things super duper easy. I should just mention there's a whole slew more fluent methods you can call here to do all kinds of other stuff, but I wanted to keep it fairly simple to avoid making it more convoluted than it was necessary. So I'm just doing a very simple example, but you can see more things. And if you go to the website, you can see lots of examples and tests that illustrate how it all works.